Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, good evening. Thank you and welcome to this first of our UN75 conversations hosted by the United Nations Academic Impact. We have a stellar cast with us today for which we are all very grateful. Today, the 29th of May, is United Nations Peacekeepers Day, the anniversary of the start of our first peacekeeping mission in UNSO, the UN Truce Supervisory Organization, in 1948. Since then, more than 1 million individuals have taken part in UN peacekeeping in some 72 operations, and 3,900 have lost their lives. We now have 95,000 peacekeeping personnel in the field spread over 13 operations. The purpose of the series, the 75 for 75 conversations, is to obviously look not only at the world in the 75th year of the United Nations, but also after the pandemic that has currently gripped us. There's a great deal of talk about building back better. We thought in the academic impact we would step a bit further and think not just of building back, but of rebuilding and rethinking many of the concepts upon which the United Nations is based and which have been in the currency of international dialogue and diplomacy for the past 75 years, and today is the first such instance. I would now like to invite our wonderful intern, Talita Melo, to invite our first speaker. Talita?
Thank you, Ramu. Thank you so much. I have the pleasure to welcome Commander Carla Monteiro de Castro Araújo, a Brazilian naval officer working in the United Nations Multidimensional Integrated Stabilization Mission in the Central African Republic. She has been selected to receive the 2019 United Nations Military Gender Advocate of the Year Award. Comandante Carla, muito obrigada por sua participação. Parabéns por receber esse importante prêmio. So could you please start talking on rethinking gender and peacekeeping?
Thank you, Talita. It's a pleasure to be here with you, all you today, with such distinguished speaking guests. So I will introduce myself. I'm Commander Carla Monteiro de Castro Araújo from Brazilian Navy, and I work in MINUSCA as Force Military Gender and Protection Advisor. I was graduated in dental school in 1991, and I did my post-graduation in São Paulo from 1991 to 1994. After that, I came back to Rio, and I worked for 2 or 3 years teaching on dental schools in universities in Rio. And in 1997, I joined Navy for the Navy Health Corps. And then I got deployed here in 2019 with almost 23 years of serving armed forces. And I bring with me to this mission some analytical skills, research methodology, alternative course of actions, and communication. These are very important here to develop my work. And I get this from this background. Since I began here, I realized that our major problem was also that people sometimes don't know what they have to do. And we developed a training of trainers where we trained key focal points in the units to deliver basic training to all our more than 11,000 military personnel in our component. And in this training of trainers, we trained them in gender, in child protection, in protection of civilian, conflict-related sexual violence, and prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse. And they were also trained in training skills so they can deliver the basic training for the whole component. And I also worked to strengthen the link inside our military component and also with my counterparts in other missions. One of my tasks were talking with troops, training them, talk to the local women in the community, also to keep person in the community. I have some pictures of these interactions, and keep person in the community. I have a picture of our community alert network in Pombolo, and also to key leaders like IDP camp leaders and women association leaders, and also to children. So I always think that we learn a lot with these people, and we can help them a lot if we know how to hear them. So I'm very proud of being here, of being a peacekeeper, and I leave my contact to you, the email, the UN email and the private email, as well as my address, as well as my phone number. So thank you so much for the attention. And sorry for this.
Thank you so much, Commander. My apologies for the technical glitch, but we heard you loud and clear. It was a very moving description, and I think you, in a sense, personify what we've been trying to do in the academic impact, which is that no matter what your discipline, it can lead to a vocation relevant to the United Nations. In your case, you went to dental school, and now you're leading a major peacekeeping effort. I know that our team in Brazil, the resident coordinator, Mr. Fabianich, and the director of our information center in Rio, Kimberly Mann, have told us how well the news was received of your honor in Brazil, but truly it's an international honor because you belong to the world. We are very grateful to you, Commander Araújo, and we look forward to being in touch with you. Thank you. Obrigado.
Thank you for your kind words.
Thank you.
Have a nice day. I'm sorry.
Thank you
I
so
won't
much.
be
I know you have to go for the medal ceremony now, and we wish you all the best for that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'd now like to invite our first, the keynote speaker, who is a senior and old friend, both of the United Nations and the United Nations Academic Impact. Susana Malcorra, who's now the Dean of the IE School of Global and Public Affairs in Madrid, in Spain, was, until her appointment as the Foreign Minister of Argentina, the chef de cabinet to the Secretary General of the United Nations, and before that worked in peacekeeping and peacemaking at both the highest policy levels as Undersecretary General in the Department of Operational Support and in the World Food Programme before that. She also represented the Secretary General at the 5th anniversary of the Academic Impact, and we're very grateful for her presence there. So let me invite Ms. Dean Malcorra to share her thoughts with us. Ms. Malcorra?
Thank you very much, and I hope you hear me well. Is that correct?
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Dean. Thank you.
It's a pleasure to be here, to see so many familiar faces, to be back at the UN, even if virtually. This is a proof of how COVID has impacted our life, but also has allowed us to connect in different ways and stay close, even if we are afar. It was really very, very moving to listen to Commander Monteiro de Araújo speak about her experience. For some of us who have been in the Central African Republic many times, we know the challenges she faces, the whole of the peacekeeping force faces there. So I am very, very happy to see that she is receiving this award as a recognition to her personally, but to all the many that have gone through this experience in the Central African Republic and beyond. You know, it's really a pleasure to be able to speak again and to think again about peacekeeping. I have been away from the United Nations for almost 5 years now, and away from the heart of peacekeeping for 9 years now. But the one thing that you learn is that once a peacekeeper, always a peacekeeper. And that's something that I cannot deny at all.
No video on. She's just gonna.
And again, you know, peacekeeping is a very interesting construction. As I'm sure you all recognize, peacekeeping as such, peace operations as such, are not included in the Charter of the United Nations. But as peacekeeping today is one of the flagships of the UN, and people recognize the UN through peacekeeping in many parts of the world, one realizes the life that this has taken on its own to really represent at the heart what the United Nations stands for. So it is essential, an essential element of what the United Nations does, what peacekeeping does. And when things go well in peacekeeping, the United Nations is perceived well. When things go not so well in peacekeeping, that immediately has an impact in the United Nations. There is this mutually reinforcing relationship between the UN and UN peacekeeping that is so strong that one cannot disassociate one from the other. Peacekeeping has evolved throughout time, and I'm sure there are many things we can say about how that evolution took place. But I think what we need to recognize today is that the challenges peacekeeping faces today, the peacekeepers face today, have nothing to do with the challenges they faced when the first mission was established. And this, to me, is at the heart of what we need to think about how to move forward with peacekeeping. And it is at the heart because not any longer the peacekeepers face challenges of confrontation between countries where you secure a border to keep peace between the two. You now face much more complex and much more multidimensional threats that go beyond boundaries, as the COVID is in itself, and that requires different capabilities, different preparation, different strength, different profile of forces, and that is, in my view, the biggest challenge UN peacekeeping faces today. And today, in the context of COVID, that is even more clear. You know, peacekeeping today has to support, has to help, has to make an impact in places where COVID is starting to appear, where COVID is a great threat to the population, is a great threat to peacekeepers themselves. How do you do to deliver on your mandate in a context where that such a threat in life and security is posed not only to the population you are there to serve, but to the peacekeepers themselves? So this is one element that has to be taken into account when you think about peacekeepers. But I would like to nail down in particular to one aspect of peacekeeping operations, which is the gender question. And of course, this is an element, a central element of the celebrations this year. And I'm very pleased to see that that has been the theme of the year. Clearly, Resolution 1325 brought to the forefront the notion of what it means to have a gender perspective in peacekeeping. And it brought it in different ways with 4 pillars of implementation: on prevention, on protection, on participation, and relief and recovery. And I think when we think about, when we analyze how far have we gone into each one of these pillars, we will realize that the evolution has been uneven. And even though there has been an increase in participation, and we just had a proof of that with the commander who just left us, it is still a very, very, very small portion of the participation in peacekeeping operations. And when we look at the challenges peacekeepers face, and when we look at the connection peacekeeping need to have with their local communities, and the Commander Monteiro de Araujo just referred to that, they need to listen, they need to be engaged, they need to be involved. That is clearly a very, very important attribute that women bring to the perspective of peacekeepers. So I think we again, in a context of complexity, in a very fluid reality, in a reality where the threats of peace and security are not so simple. There are most of the time within the communities, they are mixed with the communities, where COVID-19 as a recent additional threat brings another element of a high risk to peacekeepers. Thinking about women in peacekeepers becomes even more central. And I just want to share with you an example, a personal example that I live in the Congo, in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. When we were able to break a deal in 2014, when the M23 invaded Goma and took Goma, in fact, and we were able to broker a ceasefire agreement, and we were able to set up what is called the framework of the Great Lakes. One of the central elements for that framework was the recognition of the role that women will play in moving forward. And it was very important to have as the special envoy a woman, and it was Mary Robinson, you might remember, the one who played that role in absolute connection with the peacekeeping operations on the ground. And when you listen to the experience of bringing women into the conversation, bringing their perspectives, informing the processes and the settings that peacekeepers have or peace dealings have in any region, that is really what makes the biggest difference. Because in the end, what we are there for is to not only set a new peace or contain or maintain a new peace, we need to rebuild the social infrastructure of the place where we are. And it is fundamental to do that through women and with women of the place, through women of the place. But in order to do that, we need to have women in our own operations that can associate themselves and communicate themselves with their counterparts. So it is a great joy to see that we have a resolution 1325. It is a great joy to see that at that time, the Security Council was able to come together and decide by consensus on this resolution. We need to keep pushing because the resolution still has much space to be developed, to be implemented, and we need to maintain, and we hope to maintain, that same commitment by the Security Council, by all members of the Security Council, so that they can come together and support and endorse further implementation of 13. This is something central to what peacekeeping does, to how it does it, but most importantly, is central to what peacekeeping should be doing in the future in order to really make a huge impact. Thank you. With that, I'll leave it here, and I'm sure there will be questions and opportunities to come back. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Dean Malcorra. That was a very intrepid start to our discussion today. Thank you for bringing back to mind Resolution 1325, whose 20th anniversary we observe this year, and of course also the 25th anniversary of the Beijing Conference on Women, and the personal reflections you shared from your career at the United Nations and the importance of women, both at the peacekeeping table and, as we saw from the commander, at the operational level. You made a wonderful point about the necessity for peacekeepers to be in contact and in touch with the local population rather than appearing, frankly, in a sense, as occupying forces. And I think that is certainly something which the United Nations has been able to nurture, largely as a result of the women participation in its operations over the years. One of the aspects of the Charter of the United Nations, whose 75th anniversary we observe in a few weeks, is a reference to regional arrangements. And the question of regional has always been debated. Is it a necessarily an immediately physically contiguous region, or could it be a broader concept of regional arrangement? And one of the most effective such arrangements at the United Nations has been the Group of 77 in China. And this group has been, in a sense, host to the largest number of peacekeeping missions, but also the source of the largest number of peacekeepers. And so it's a privilege now to welcome Ambassador Pierre, who joined the permanent mission of Guyana to the United Nations a few months ago in January, and is the coordinator for Guyana's chairmanship this year of the Group of 77 and China. I also welcome Ambassador Pierre as a former senior colleague at the United Nations, where he's worked at the national, the regional, and the international levels, prior to which he was in the Foreign Service of Guyana. So, Ambassador Pierre, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, and good morning to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I will speak to the issue of the nexus between peace and development. I have no experience in peacekeeping, so I approach this from a completely different angle. My slides will touch briefly on a bit of the history of peace and development nexus in the United Nations. I will speak a little bit also about the 2030 agenda, the role that Ecosoc, the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations, has played in this regard. I will talk a little bit about a specific example of Haiti, but the peace and development nexus and Ecosoc's role has been manifested in several other instances of peacekeeping operations. I will talk a little bit also about the current UN reforms that have been going on for a few years now, and I will end my slides by looking ahead somewhat. So I see the presentation is up, so I hope everyone can see it. In the early 1990s, the Security Council, the General Assembly, and Ecosoc recognized, of course, the need for comprehensive approach to conflict prevention and peace building. You heard a reference by Professor Malcora to Resolution 1325, and that, in fact, legislated the role of Security Council, Ecosoc, the General Assembly, etc. Ecosoc contributed to conflict prevention and peace building by developing mechanisms to respond to the issues faced by countries emerging from conflict. And so we're talking here really about not countries that are maybe at the end of the conflict period or have just emerged from conflict. And this is where Ecosoc then steps in. Now, we fast forward to 2015. Prior to 2015, and our previous Secretary General and the keynote speaker were very heavily involved in the process for the post-MDG, post-2015 agenda. Now, in September 2015, the United Nations adopted the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And a central part of that agenda is a statement that there can be no peace without development and no development without peace. Now, the agenda therefore links all the strands of development, and there are three components of development: economic, social, and environmental. But it does not limit itself only to economic, social, and environmental development. The agenda links it also to the aspects of human rights and peace and security. Now, for those of you who are new to the concept of the SDG framework, there are 17 goals, and I think it's now well known across the world. But very quickly, there are 17 goals. All of the goals are considered to be integrated, interconnected, and indivisible. And the goals reinforce the link between peace and development from goal 1, which deals with poverty, right through to goal 17. The particular goal that is often focused on with respect to issues of peace and development is goal 16, which speaks of governance, peace and security, human rights, etc. The peace and development nexus is therefore crucial in achieving all of the SDGs, and hence the interconnected and integrated manner of the agenda. Peacekeeping is seen as a development enabler. And that essentially means that the peacekeeping efforts are really geared towards facilitating or forging ahead with tangible development objectives at the national or local level. And the peacekeeping operations efforts go well beyond traditional peacekeeping means or methods. Now, I'll speak a little bit about Ecosoc, the Ecosoc mechanisms and the Peace Building Commission. This is a new entity that was created, the Peace Building Commission. In 2002, the Peace Building Commission, the establishment of the Ecosoc Advisory Group to support Guinea-Bissau and Burundi. These were two instances when Ecosoc stepped into a situation of conflict and attempted to establish the strong links between peace and security and development. Then in 2005, both mandates, that is of Ecosoc and the Ecosoc advisory groups of Guinea-Bissau and Burundi, both were terminated as the General Assembly took the decision to create the Peace Building Commission established in General Assembly Resolution 60/180. Here in UN headquarters, we're very fond of referring to numbers and resolutions, but that is the nature of the work we do. Ecosoc and the Peace Building Commission have had joint efforts in many other instances. In 2011, since the establishment of the commission itself, they established promoting durable peace and sustainable development in Sudan and South Sudan, and this was just prior to the independence. Then in 2012, the Council and the Peace Building Commission launched a partnerships for job creation for young people in countries emerging from conflict. In 2016, Ecosoc and the Peace Building Commission addressed the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and Sustaining Peace, and that is, again, an attempt by both bodies to make a tangible link between their roles in peace building and in development. And in 2017, the Council addressed the question of the situation in the Sahel region. And then finally, in 2018, it addressed the linkages between climate change and challenges to peace building and sustaining peace in the Sahel. And so the Council has been very active, as you can see, year on year in the area of peace building and development. And this is done in collaboration with the Peace Building Commission itself. I should have said one thing also, that the Peace Building Commission, the legislation to set up the Peace Building Commission, in fact, recognize Ecosoc's central role in the very composition of the Peace Building Commission. 7 of the Commission's members are actually nominated by the Economic and Social Council. And year on year, their work programs are reinforced by General Assembly legislation that really call them to work more closely together. Let me focus a little bit on the ad hoc advisory group on Haiti. This was established in 1999. The Security Council invited UN bodies and agencies, in particular Ecosoc, to design tangible support for Haiti. The mandate has been renewed annually by Ecosoc and follow closely and provide advice on the long-term development strategy of Haiti. Each year, the ad hoc advisory group visits Haiti, coordinates very closely with the resident coordinator and the head of peacekeeping operations, as well as the UN country team that is present in Haiti. And the ad hoc advisory group performs a primary role of advocacy, which has been crucial. It highlights peace and development nexus and ensures that the United Nations provides an effective coordination and delivers as one in its approach to the support that is provided for Haiti. That role is still continuing since 1999. The ad hoc advisory group is very active and regularly interacts with UN presence on the ground in Haiti. It has been chaired for some time now by the government of Canada, and they've maintained a very strong interest and presence in those in that work. United Nations reforms, as I said earlier on, I will make a very quick description of what this is. The aim of the reform process, which started about 4 years ago, has been to ensure that the UN is fit for purpose. The reform, the principal plank of the reform has been the repositioning of the United Nations development system to deliver on the 2030 agenda. Fast forward to 2020, we are now in the process of, we have just in fact concluded the Ecosoc operational activities segment, which is a segment of the Council that looks at the development work of the system on the ground. And the operational activities segment assesses the UN's development system reform, addressing today's multifaceted crisis. We have just concluded that. We've heard from many resident coordinators, UN country teams, that have highlighted the UN system's support that it's providing to the countries, especially in the present COVID-19 crisis. And we made the link between peacekeeping operations as accelerators of SDGs in conflict and post-conflict settings. Where we are now, we are in the process of formulating a draft resolution that the Council itself will adopt to bring closure and give the final mandates for those elements, the remaining elements of the repositioning of the United Nations Development System. Looking ahead, and I will end on this one, in 2020, later this year, hopefully we can have a General Assembly. We don't know in what shape or form it will occur, but there will be a resolution that will be considered by the General Assembly on the Quadrennial Comprehensive Policy Review, and that's what QCPR stands for. I apologize for the acronym. The purpose of that resolution is to look at the policy and operational guidance that the intergovernmental process will provide to the UN operational entities on the ground. This resolution, as the name implies, happens every 4 years. So the last one was actually issued in 2016, and now we're in the process of reviewing the whole comprehensive quadrennial comprehensive policy framework. This comes right at the cusp of the Decade of Action for Sustainable Development, and as someone said during the operational activities segment, it is time for us to walk the talk. And so a critical focus of the resolution will really be about moving from reform and architecture, which the system has been focused on for the last 4 years, to the real issues of giving tangible, concrete policy and operational guidance to the UN system on the ground, particularly in areas where their countries and societies are emerging from conflict and crisis. We will also be looking to create synergies across UN bodies with Ecosoc, the Security Council, Peace Building Commission, and the Human Rights Commission. And we'll be as well looking to transition the development as an important juncture away from conflict and to prevent countries from sliding back into conflict. As is normally the case, the Ecosoc Humanitarian Affairs segment, which is another segment of the Council. Council is a whole system by itself, the Economic and Social Council. The Humanitarian Affairs segment will be coming up soon, but there is an important transition event that is convened by the Ecosoc Humanitarian Affairs segment just before the start of the segment. The aim of that transition event is in fact to look at what are the critical trends and elements that need to be addressed in the transition from humanitarian situations of crisis and humanitarian relief that's provided by the UN system, into the process of the continuum to development. And so that too is coming up very soon, and we will be making inputs into that process. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I will be available for questions.
Thank you Thank you very much indeed, Your Excellency Ambassador Pierre, for your presentation. Certainly, it is quite critical to explain the nexus between peacekeeping and development, which sometimes is not well known. So we really appreciate your inputs on this. We do apologize to the audience due to the technical glitch in regard to the presentations from our previous speakers, but we will certainly share both slides, groups of slides with you in the follow-up email after this dialogue takes place. So it is now my honor to present Dr. Mauryan. She's a lecturer at the University of Auckland in New Zealand and teaching, among other courses, one on media and politics in an age of globalization. She's also a radio producer and is the author of 2 books, one entitled Kill the Messenger, The Media's Role in the Fate of the World, and another book on reporting from the danger zone, frontline journalists, their jobs, and increasingly perilous future. We would like to also highlight that the University of Auckland is the UNAI hub for Sdg 4, which is on quality education. So we are very grateful with the University of Auckland and Dr. Mauryan for accepting our invitation. So Dr. Mauryan, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm really honored to be able to share some thoughts with you, a little bit of research. The introduction was perfect, so I don't need to say anything more. And I timed my remarks to being just under 7 minutes. So let's see how that goes. I think the first and most important point is that I cannot really emphasize the point more strongly that critical journalism can mean the difference between life and death, both for the peacekeepers and for the peace kept. And this is even more true, I think, in the age of the internet, when messages are unfiltered, unfact-checked. Obviously, we know the worst case scenarios historically: the Rwandan genocide, the Holocaust, the Bosnian War, now Israel-Palestine conflict, where media have exacerbated conflict and helped to bring about some of the worst human rights atrocities we've faced. So one of the things that I have examined is, what are the messages that are the exacerbators? I want to apologize also because it is 2 in the morning here. So my brain is not as functional as it normally would be, but that's okay. So if I stumble a little bit on my words, please forgive me. So what I've identified is several themes, some that have been identified by scholars before me. And these are the things that I feel like we really have to watch out for, both for the peacekeeper and for the peace kept. There's hate frames. I call them hate frames, and I call them genocidal frames. Blaming the other for a crisis, vilifying them and dehumanizing them. And then I think the worst of all is the justification of killing based on some noble cause. You know, obviously the Holocaust was a purification goal, but you can see that across almost all of these really horrible scenarios where people are targeted for killing, for mass killing. Now, ethical journalists also can facilitate peace and democratization, and this is a process that I have noticed has been used by peacekeepers, and has also been used by peacemakers. So Northern Ireland is a prime example in which journalists help to facilitate the peace process, and that has been something that has been kept. But you've seen it in other scenarios, helping to end apartheid in South Africa, bring about human rights in many cases. So the coverage of peacekeeping missions, there's not a lot of scholarship out there. So of the I'll talk a little bit about the scholarship, and then I'll talk about the coverage that I gleaned from a little mini study that I've done. But the context is that traditional media tends to like conflict and cover simple things, and they tend to cover intense drama. So some of this makes it difficult to get good coverage for peacekeeping missions when they're successful. They do occur, but the complex nature of a peacekeeping mission, the long-term process of a peacekeeping mission, and the timing of the peacekeeping mission all are some of the complicating factors of getting really good coverage. Still, peacekeeping missions are getting good coverage. Whenever I did a quick glean, I would say the majority have been positive portrayals of both the missions and the peacekeepers themselves. When there's a scandal like what happened in Haiti, both with the sex scandal and the cholera outbreak, then the peacekeeping missions and the peacekeepers end up getting a disproportionate negative coverage compared to the successes that they also bring about. So again, this is not just the news norms, which are, focused on conflict, simplicity, drama, but also the tendency to cover the violent phase of a conflict. So media don't tend to go and cover pre-violent phases of a conflict. So we don't understand the context for which, peacekeeping and peacemaking and the conflict itself occur in. Media also don't cover the post-conflict very well. They tend to just cover the violence, what a lot of journalists call the bang-bang. And that makes it really difficult to help convey what it is that peacekeeping missions are trying to do and the successes that they bring about. Let's see. Is there anything else I would like to add on this? A couple things. I think one piece of literature, which is a scholar, I believe she's even here now in New Zealand, Corson, Dr. Corson, she examined 2 peacekeeping missions over a period of 7 years and found really, I think, not very big number, but 173 articles. Most of those missions, she looked at 2 in particular, Cote d'Ivoire and Haiti, she called staggering disparities. And this is one of the things that I feel like peacekeeping missions are up against. While she looked at all kinds of international media, the local media, for example, in Haiti, saw the peacekeeping missions and portrayed them, according to her study, as occupiers. And that's a difficult thing to overcome, especially when peacekeepers and public members don't get to interact in real terms. Then they're relying on these media portrayals. So it can really affect the success of these missions to be able to tell the story and help people, bring them up to speed in terms of what good peacekeepers are bringing. And then, of course, there is the avoidance of scandal and avoidance of disaster that occasionally we do see, like in the case of Haiti. This is an area of scholarship that really needs much more coverage, and much more study, and I hope to be able to contribute to that ongoingly. So thank you so much for having me be here and to talk a little bit about this. I think the final thing I want to say is, in terms of media portrayals of peacekeepers, there are usually 4 portrayals that you see: protectors, fact finders, public servants, and violators. Mostly the first 3. And then because of the tendency to focus on the violation of values and the violation of what is normal, what's supposed to be normal, that's when that last one tends to get its disproportionate coverage. That can be avoided, obviously, by good practices, which I know we're all trying to do. So I will leave the rest for questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Mauryan, for your insights. And certainly it is quite interesting to see how important not only the media depiction of peacekeeping operations, but also the public opinion perception about these missions can actually shape not only how journalists actually cover the operations on the ground in the field, but also the political implications and ramifications of this public opinion perception, of course. So we thank you very much indeed for your insights. And now we have the pleasure to welcome Dr. Franz Baumann. He's a visiting research professor at the New York University, also a member of the board of directors of the Academic Council on the United Nations system. He worked for a number of UN entities, including the UN Development Program, the UN Industrial Development Organization, and the UN Secretariat, including in the management of peacekeeping operations. As he was also a UN Special Advisor on Environment and Peace Operations. So we are very honored to have Dr. Baumann. Vielen Dank. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Omar. Very interesting to listen to all the other presentations, and of course the privilege to be at the end. And I'm modifying a bit what I had thought before. Let me start with Susanna Marcora's observation: once a peacekeeper, always a peacekeeper. That is, of course, true. I joined peacekeeping in 1989, which was insofar not lucky, because we won the Nobel Peace Prize in '88. I would have liked to have won it, but I missed it by 1 year. But '89 was a very good year because peacekeeping was the first time a 10,000 person operation in Namibia. I just leave it at that. I worked in 1993 in Haiti, the first UN OAS, Organization of American States, peacekeeping operation, human rights monitoring mission. A year later, in one of the most successful UN operations, which doesn't get a lot of coverage, which was the first elections, democratic elections in South Africa that brought about the end of apartheid and that instituted a democratic system in South Africa. The UN organized those elections, and it was run actually out of what is today Department of Peacekeeping Operation, or whatever it is called now. And then in '93, I did become the first executive officer of the Department of Peacekeeping Operations, when this department was created after the end of the Cold War. The Secretary General Agenda for Peace realized that there had to be an institutional backbone to support missions, which, as Susanna said earlier, were not only now interposed between former combatants, but civil wars, different situations. It needed a new structure, and that was the Department of Peacekeeping Operations. And as you said, Omar, a couple of years ago, I worked on greening the blue, making the UN operations more sustainable. But what I wanted to mention is that the United Nations were created in 1945 as a utopian project out of the catastrophe of World War II, which was the second World War within the space of a generation. And there was great idealism, vision behind the establishment of the United Nations, namely that states would cooperate regardless how big, how powerful, how rich, or the opposite they were. The rights of all people were to be protected by the United Nations. The World War, post-World War II peace was supposed to be based on cooperation, not only among friends, but among rivals and former enemies. One cannot emphasize too strongly the concept of cooperation. And cooperation is confidence building. And now I jump to today. Cooperation would be so much needed today in a world where the challenges are complex, global, and integrated. Yet forces are gaining around the world whose responses are simplistic, reckless, and parochial, and whose protagonists are intolerant, authoritarian, and nationalistic. So this is where peacekeeping comes in. Peacekeeping operations are a phenomenally precious instrument in two respects. And we heard the commander and we heard Susanna Makora speak how the interaction of missions is in post-conflict civil war situations. But there is another element which I would like to add, and I have experienced this in over 30 years at the UN, and that is that the composition of the mission, the international composition of the missions, that you have contingents, that you have civilians from all parts of the world, and it doesn't matter if the commander is Brazilian and somebody else is from India and some third person is from Italy. The cooperation of citizens of the world under the blue helmet or the blue beret to work on the ideas of cooperation, compromise is, as the former Secretary General Kofi Annan called it, precious. And he urged member states, and we just heard about often peacekeepers being mainly highlighted for their violations of duties, but it's the responsibility, I think, of all citizens of the world, of all governments, to build up this precious instrument, also very cheap, that it can actually do and live the spirit of the United Nations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Baumann, and thank you also for reminding us, including ourselves, UN staff, the importance of the UN flag, the UN emblem, and how we all, citizens of the world and peoples of the world, actually, as it's stated in the preamble of the UN Charter, not only those of us who had the privilege to work with the UN, but also the mankind, everybody, all of us have a responsibility to our own world. So peacekeeping is actually one of these profound examples of how actual multilateral cooperation can serve the purpose for the common good. So we thank you very much. Vielen Dank, Dankeschön for your participation. So we now my colleague Talita will upload a survey, a link to a survey that has been prepared by our colleagues in the UN75 team. As you can see there, it is a link that will lead you directly to a survey, and that survey is a very simple one, but a very critical one for the United Nations, because in the 75th anniversary of the organization, the United Nations wants to hear from you. So basically, the link there, un75.online/partner/UNAI. So either during the remainder of this dialogue or after the dialogue has concluded, please go online and fill it. It's completely anonymous. But the results of this survey will actually serve the purpose of the United Nations to examine itself, and these results will also be shown to member states during the upcoming session of the UN General Assembly. The celebration of the 75th anniversary of the organization is and should be an opportunity to hear your thoughts, and to know your comments about what's going on in the world and how the world should be hopefully in the next 75 years. So we appreciate and we thank in advance that you fill out this survey. And also my colleague Brenda just posted the link in the chat box. So feel free to those of you who want to do it to fill out the form online. And now we would like to proceed to the moderated discussion in the remainder minutes that we have ahead of us. So those of you who would like to ask questions, please indicate your name and affiliation in the chat box, or just put the comment or question in the chat box itself, and we will read it to our audience and to our speakers. In the meantime, we invite you to go to our website, academicimpact.un.org, and you will see there that this is the very first of our online dialogue series that we are organizing and hosting within the framework of the 75th anniversary of the United Nations. So we are going to host one on Monday on preventing radicalization and violent extremism. We're going to have another one on Friday, the 5th of June, within the 4th and 5th of June, on climate change and how universities can actually help in the combat of climate change. So you can see on our website the list of the different dialogues. So we really appreciate your participation. And you can spread the word about those within your respective networks. So those of you who would like to ask questions, please indicate so in the chat box. In the meantime, we would like to remind you that we are going to send a follow-up email with the link to the recording, the video recording of this dialogue, along with some additional resources that will be provided by our speakers. And of course, given the technical problems we have with the presentations of two of our speakers, we will include as well the files to those slides.
Omar, if I may, I think since we're still waiting for questions, we have with us our closing speaker, the distinguished Lieutenant Governor of Pondicherry in India, whom we at the United Nations know as the first woman civilian police advisor, Kiran Bedi. We're privileged to have her. And I thought I would hand the floor to Mrs. Bedi for her reflections on the civilian police in peacekeeping and her own personal reflections and recollections. Madam Governor.
Happy to see Ramu, and I am happy to see Omar. These are my old faces. Thank you for inviting me. Well, all I can say is that other than United Nations, there is no other organization which can do what we did and peacekeeping operation, what it does. There are regionals, but the United Nations still, the blue helmets and the blue flag still retains its credibility in peacekeeping operations. For the reason that the kind of worldwide experience it brings along, the expertise, but because we select them, we carefully select the expertise and we bring men and women. Now, whether men are better or women better, I will come to you later. And how women perform differently, I'll talk to you through my experience. But my experience tells me that there is, as far as I said once again, that there is no substitute. That's how I felt when I took over as the police advisor. And I do believe, and I'm convinced that but for the DPKO, now whatever it's called, peacekeeping operations, many countries would not have what we have today, or they would not have been in existence as a country. Like, let's look at East Timor. Let's look at Liberia. Let's look at Somalia. Let's look at Sierra Leone. Let's look at Sudan. These are all peacekeeping. Let's look at Kosovo. All these are remarkable end products of the United Nations intervention and peacekeeping operation. I also know that in every peacekeeping operation, as we experienced, cleared by the Security Council, financed by the partnering countries, the mandate is very different. Somewhere it's light-footed and somewhere it's heavy. It's light-footed, for instance, during my time in Afghanistan. It was light-footed, let's say, in Cyprus. It was light-footed, let's say, in MINURSO. I now know more the abbreviations than the countries. But if you're getting me right, are you hearing me?
Yes. Yes.
So let's look at the challenges. The challenges in peacekeeping operations, one, of course, is the resource. It's a finance, because every peacekeeping mission is financed by the donor countries. And there are major donors and there are small donors. Some donate in kind and some donate in money. Like India is a major donor in manpower and in its military resource. Bangladesh, Nepal, they are more donating in manpower and human resource. While Japan, United States of America, Australia, Germany, the Swedish countries, more donate in revenue and very little in manpower. So most peacekeeping mission is the brunt of the peacekeeping mission, whether it's a military or it's civil police, is borne by another kind, a world which is richer in manpower. So therefore, and it's a very risky operation. And like, for instance, when we were sending men and women to certain countries like in the African continent, they ran a very big risk of catching malaria, or we call it dengue, and now there are many other issues. So certain countries being very vulnerable. Today, the whole world is very vulnerable. Imagine, the whole world is flat now when it comes to COVID-19. But earlier, it wasn't like that. Earlier, certain continents or certain countries were more vulnerable to infections and these kinds of diseases and fertility. It almost led to fertility than the rest of the world. So I think the challenge is A, finance. Second is expertise resource, where many countries are very careful. And if I would come to manpower of women, I think most of the countries where women cops are in very, very short numbers, they don't want to spare. They don't want to spare because women cops are still very small percentage of any manpower. It's still a manpower around the country. India became an exception because it happened to have me as an insider in the United Nations who knew that India could spare women police forces because India has very large number of women in formed forces, as they call formed forces, which we call Central Police Force. So therefore, women cops, if you're asking as peacekeepers, will always be short in demand, short in number to meet the demands. Therefore, countries like South Asian region may be the major suppliers. And out of that also, in fact, even India may be the major because India still has border security force, Central Reserve Police Force, Inter-Tibetan Border Police Force. India has invested hugely into formed units and having very remarkable women training forces in these. So A, I said it's manpower, which is in short supply, but expertise also people find very difficult to spare because every expert cop is needed in their own remarkable. So we used to have a lot of problems getting. Therefore, we had to draw upon the second best and not the best. Well, naturally, it's understandable. So manpower, finances, the risk factor in different, the living conditions of the well-being. And fourth, of course, is the skill set, as I said, is available. So women, as I again explained, is always in short supply. So if I would round up, now the challenge before peacekeeping operation is, while you have a standard operating procedure, you have mandate, you can be more influenced by the donor country. What is the interest of the donor country? The challenge before the peacekeeping mission would or the peacekeeper is the rule of law. How do you take the country? For instance, Iraq is a major example, and we've had Sergei's fertility. You know what happened with Sergei. Most of you have seen this film on Sergo. Sergo was the Sergo film. Actually, it's exceedingly moving. What happened to Sergo? Sergo believed in one thing, and the mandate probably or the will or the country's need was different. So I think we lost a very capable officer because there was not an alignment with what the donor countries needed and what he thought as representative of Mr. Kofi Annan at that time. And I was there at that time when we lost Sergo. So I think that's a major challenge which even I faced. When you have a major pressure of the financer and the interest of the region, and the third is interest of the country. What is interest of the future interest? I think that's a major challenge before peacekeepers, men or women, is how do you rise above and go above the donor country's interest to look at long-term interest of that country. And we did that for East Timor in a very big way. I think it's worked very well in Kosovo. Certain countries worked exceedingly well. Liberia worked very well. So have other countries. So I would say these are my high points of the opening remarks in the women peacekeeping. I would still underline the fact that other than the United Nations, there is nobody else to go and keep the peace. So if there is peace to keep, if you have peace to keep, then there is United Nations there to keep it and go about and rebuild it. After all, democracy in Liberia, we owe it entirely to the United Nations. East Timor as an independent country and democratic country, entirely to the United Nations. Sudan recovering bit by bit, not the way it was earlier, we owe a lot to the United Nations. So I would think that United Nations still is the last resort not maybe the first resort, because regions can always take over, is a very critical resort in peacekeeping operation. But it all depends now on financing. But today, you have a new challenge of COVID-19, absolutely social distancing. In fact, before I came, I was with a mask myself. I was in a meeting, and I was, in fact, for you, I've taken the mask. Even in my own meetings, I'm not taking off the mask. I'm still masked with social distancing. So I think peacekeeping operations now, for the coming 2-3 years maybe, will get a very big hit. No country spare their manpower, whether it's, if they do, how do they manage social distancing? How do they manage sanitation? How do they manage masking? And how do they manage fighting what certain countries may be even more vulnerable? I think you have a newer challenge. United Nations has a newer challenge in peacekeeping operations because it may not have the kind of abundance of manpower, whether it's military or police, now. I think that's a new debate which the United Nations may need to go through. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Governor. That was a wonderful, you've really timed it perfectly as well, because we had intended this to be a 75-minute conversation, and it's exactly 75 minutes since we began, even though you came in at very short notice. Thank you for accommodating this in the midst of the many other commitments that you had this afternoon, evening. And thank you for really that reaffirmation of hope, because as you said, we are the United Nations, the last resort, but the phrase you used, entirely because of the United Nations, could well be the subtitle for our 75-year history. And I think the personal grace that you brought to your police career in my home city of Delhi, and among the most vulnerable in Delhi in the Tihar jail, for instance, that sense of caring and compassion to those who are often left behind is something which you brought to your role as the Chief Civilian Police Advisor and to your recollections, and we are very grateful. I should also like to thank all our other participants today, beginning with Commander Araujo from Brazil, Dean Susana Malcora, Ambassador Neil Pierre, and of course, Professor Amudian from New Zealand, and my very old friend, Franz Baumann, among whose misdeeds as executive officer in the Department of Peacekeeping was signing my recruitment letter 26 years ago. So I owe him a great debt, and thank you. And on behalf of the entire United Nations Academic Impact team, Omar, do you want to add anything logistically, please?
Yes, we will share the questions that we are receiving in the chat box due to the limitations of time that we have exhausted already the 75 minutes of conversation, but we will make sure that the questions that you are posting on our chat box we will send to our speakers, and we will send that the follow-up email shortly, probably by the end of next week, with the video recording of the dialogue and additional resources, including information from about the peacekeeping operations currently deployed by the UN around the world.
Thank you, and have a wonderful evening, Governor. Have a wonderful afternoon, many of you, and a wonderful day for all of us in New York. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.